Hi guys, Olive here today to discuss my top nonfiction books of 2025. I read many fascinating nonfiction books in 2025, but in this video, I'm going to talk about the 10 best, the ones that impressed me the most, the ones that I couldn't stop thinking about. Before I get started talking about the books, I will quickly mention that I have ranked these books, and I'm going to be talking about them in this video in reverse order of how much I enjoyed them. So I'll start with my 10th favorite, and then slowly work my way up to talking about my number one nonfiction book of the year. And I will also mention, as I do every single year, that these are simply the nonfiction books that I read this year. They weren't necessarily published this year. But let's get started. Kicking things off at spot number 10 is The Woman Who Smashed Codes, a true story of love, spies, and the unlikely heroine who outwitted America's enemies by Jason Fagoni. Now, I should say, right off the bat, that I read this book as part of a very silly reading challenge that I made up for myself. For the better part of a calendar month, I read exclusively nonfiction books written by men named Jason. I made a whole video discussing that project and all the books that I read for it. I did it just to make me laugh, but I ended up with a top book of the year. This is a biography of an American woman named Elizabeth Smith Friedman, who was a talented codebreaker. She first helped decipher messages written in code by bootleggers and rum runners during Prohibition, but then later went on to have her own unit during World War II, unlocking the secrets of Nazi spy rings. Her contributions, though, were always minimized, especially in comparison to her husband's. He was not only her partner in marriage, but also in code breaking. They often worked as a team. But she never truly got the recognition or respect that she deserved, even as she was doing this hugely important work for the American government. Nor was she ever able to tell her own story, because she was sworn to secrecy and a lot of this information remained classified at the time of her death. But now that she is gone and a lot of this information has been declassified, Jason Fagoni was able to do all of this research, talk to people who knew her, and tell her story here. And it is such a fitting tribute. I thought this book was thorough, captivating, and deeply respectful. It surprised me in the best possible way. At number 9 is another one I read relatively recently. It's called The Great Soul of Siberia: Passion, Obsession, and One Man's Quest for the World's Most Elusive Tiger by Soo-Young Park. And this is a book that blends nature nonfiction, memoir, and history, as this Korean author describes his experiences spending long stretches of time in the Siberian winter, camped out in this underground bunker hidden from sight so that he could observe Siberian or Amur tigers in their natural habitats. Not only does he talk about the lives and relationships between 3 generations of a specific tiger family that he observed, and in such a touching way that he will have you utterly invested in the outcomes of these cats, but he also goes into detail about the history of this region and its people. And then he also mentions the harsh physical realities of bunkering down in the cold for those lengths of time. By turns, this book is peaceful, then it's terrifying, then it's heartbreaking, then it's tender. The writing is so gorgeous that you can't help but feel totally immersed in this story of his experience. It feels like you're sitting there next to him in the bunker. I actually went into a lot more detail about this book in a whole video I made discussing 2 different books on tigers. So I reviewed this book and one other book on tigers. If you missed that video, I will link it for you below and up in the cards. Coming in at number 8, though, is one that I read toward the start of the year: Franklin and Eleanor: An Extraordinary Marriage by Hazel Rowley. And this book is a sort of dual biography of our 32nd American president, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his wife, Eleanor, who is one of the most famous, most popular first ladies within American history. But this book is also an examination of their long and long speculated upon marriage, which started off very traditional and definitely evolved over time. What was clear to me as I read this book, as we follow these two in their early years, then in the years leading up to the White House, then the White House years themselves, and then after, is that no matter what happened, these two always deeply cared for each other. And they remained an incredibly strong team despite any understandings they may have had about the romantic side of their union. This book slices through all of the sensationalism that has surrounded them and their marriage over the years in order to get to the heart of how these two actually felt about each other during every phase of their relationship. And with a hefty dose of compassion, I found that it showed them just as two people trying to do their best, given their immense responsibilities and numerous personal challenges. I had been meaning to read this book for years, and I am kicking myself that I didn't pick it up sooner. I am very happy to report that my 25 nonfiction books to read in 2025 list ended up being very fruitful for me this year. Not only was that last book I just discussed part of that list originally, but 4 other of my top nonfiction books of the year first appeared on that 25 nonfiction books list, including Fireweather, A True Story from a Hotter World by John Valiant. This is one of those nonfiction books that blends several different subgenres of nonfiction as he's covering all aspects of the Fort McMurray fire in 2016. So it's a bit like a history book in the way he goes through the background of this region in Canada where the fires happened. But then it's also a science book in the way that he describes how a fire this big is initially generated and what fuels it to continue. But then also sometimes it reads like an expose in the way that he's uncovering the politics and injustices of these natural resource companies. But then he also sometimes dips into environmentalism in the way that he's breaking down how climate change can exacerbate natural disasters like this one. It is also a work of journalism in the way that he tells people's stories who lived through this nightmare and then talking about all the devastation left in its wake. But then also, most surprisingly, I would say this one also fits into the horror subgenre, if such a subgenre of nonfiction exists, because this was terrifying. I mean, it's fascinating and well-researched, but it is humbling. Complex and almost indescribable reads were definitely a theme of my nonfiction reading year in 2025, because at spot number 6 is Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution by Capo Hannon. This book blends science and anthropology, but it's much more of a thought experiment, especially in comparison with the other books on my list. In this book, the author presents some of these hypothetical Eves, our genetic ancestors who developed some of the capabilities that would go on to be passed down, eventually ending up in the human female body, which has many quirks, but can also do some remarkable things. To do this, the author uses deductions from what is currently known about how we as mammals evolved. She looks at hints written in our genetic code and extrapolations from the very limited amount of information that can be gleaned from the fossil record. But then there are gaps, things that we could never possibly know because we weren't there to see it, and there's only so much that we can go back and research. So she fills in those gaps with storytelling in order to paint a picture of how women very possibly got this way. I possess a female body, so much of this rang familiar, and I felt so seen by some of these discussions. I also just had so much fun doing this kind of educational time travel. I felt like I was back in the 90s and early 2000s playing an educational video game in school, like one of those Jumpstart games. I always loved those. And this felt like the grown-up version of that. 10 out of 10, would play again. Another year, another appearance by Michael Pollan on my year-end favorites list. Last year, The Omnivore's Dilemma pretty effortlessly earned a spot on my list. I loved that book. And if it's even possible, I think I was even more charmed by Cooked, A Natural History of Transformation. And that's why it's sitting at spot number 5. Cooked is this witty exploration of the transformation of food through cooking, how it goes from being the stuff of the earth to stuff we can eat. And he does this through the lens of the 4 traditional elements: fire, water, earth, and air. He travels all around, meets many different people, participates in various methods of cooking, like grilling, baking, and fermenting, just for example. And as he's recounting all of these experiences, he's also having a larger conversation about how much we collectively have lost as cooking and food have become more and more commercialized and processed in the Western world. As always, Michael Pollan's enthusiasm and his curiosity are absolutely infectious. I think this book could convince anyone to cook, even people who hate it. I think reading this book would make you want to give it another try. He didn't have to convince me, though, because I already love to cook. I mainly taught myself when I got out of college and absolutely fell in love with it. I've always seen it as a kind of magic. You can take all of these disparate pieces, put them together in a specific way, and create something that's so much more than the sum of its parts. It's incredible to me. So you should have seen the grin spread across my face as I was reading this book, and I saw that Michael Pollan was describing it in the exact same way, using the exact same words that I've always used to describe how I see cooking as magic. So me and Michael Pollan, we get each other. But speaking of nonfiction that felt deeply personal to me, the number 4 spot on my list belongs to The 900 Days, The Siege of Leningrad by Harrison E. Salisbury. This is an older work of history that I have been attempting to finish for just about a decade, but that I frankly struggled to finish because of the deep love that I have for this city. This is an extensively researched account of the events leading up to, during, and then after the 900-day-long blockade of the city of Leningrad, now known as St. Petersburg, by the Nazis during World War II. If you don't know anything about the siege of Leningrad, tragic doesn't even begin to come close to summing it up. I don't know if there is a word strong enough to describe what the people of Leningrad went through as the Germans kept them in a chokehold for 2.5 years. There, of course, was mass starvation and all of the terrible things that people do when they are starving to death. Constant fear, brutal cold, death on a scale that is really hard to wrap your head around. For anyone out there watching who doesn't know this about me, I studied abroad in St. Petersburg as a college student. I think I left a piece of my heart there when I left. But one of the activities that was organized for us as a group of students was to go visit a memorial, a mass cemetery for the victims of the siege of Leningrad. And because there were so many deaths, there aren't names listed on a wall, but instead there are just these massive plots of land with simply a year marked on the front. And as I was walking around, I just remember being so overwhelmed by how many plots of land there were. So I think that's part of why this is extra hard for me to read. These death counts aren't numbers on a page for me. I have stood in their presence before. But although this book did rip me open, I can call it a masterpiece for the way that it portrays these events, but also in the way that it humanizes so many of these historical details by weaving in stories of people who lived this, who survived this. It is also an indictment of the absurdities of the Soviet system, the arrogance of many Soviet leaders, including Stalin himself. It's a record of the many military blunders that allowed the Germans to retain control of the city for as long as they did. But most importantly, it is a testament to human resilience and the strength of the human spirit. It is not light reading, but it is something I will never forget. The third best nonfiction book I read in 2025 also details a tragedy, albeit a much more recent one. That book is called The Devil at His Elbow, Alec Murdaugh and the Fall of a Southern Dynasty by Valerie Borline. This is a book about the many crimes of former attorney Alec Murdaugh, most notably the murders of his wife and son, for which he was relatively recently convicted. This book is about those crimes and this investigation, of course, but it's about a lot more than that. It begins far earlier and tells the entire history of the Murdaugh family, a scarily powerful bunch in the South Carolina Lowcountry. And that legacy, the name Murdaugh, the wealth and the privilege that came with that was eventually passed down to Alec, who got himself hooked on pills, embezzled staggering sums of money from his law firm and from unsuspecting innocent people who he was supposed to be helping. And then eventually he murdered 2 of his family members, one of whom, his son Paul, did an immense amount of harm in his short lifetime. I do love the title of this book, but I would like to propose an alternate title, The Audacity in His Bloodline, because the whole lot of them did whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, no matter who it hurt. I don't think a work of true crime has ever ranked this high on my top nonfiction reads of the year list before, so allow that to be a vote in this book's favor because I thought it was incredibly good, to say the least. The research is rock solid, the writing is compelling, and most importantly, I found that it made sense of an extremely convoluted situation. It showed so much compassion to the many victims of the Murdaugh clan and really exposed the rotten heartwood at the core of this family tree. I don't think I've ever read a better work of true crime than this. I've not had my expectations exceeded by a book by this much in a really long time. I will admit I did expect big things from The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, A Hmong Child, Her American Doctors, and The Collision of Two Cultures by Anne Fadiman, primarily because it was recommended to me by my sister, who, in addition to being a prolific reader, she's also a nurse. I did expect this would be good, but I didn't anticipate it would be unlike anything I had ever read. As I said earlier, a minor theme of my 2025 nonfiction reading year is books that are hard to describe, and this book is no exception. This book is essentially about complications surrounding a medical situation. Parents of a child who had epilepsy took their baby daughter to a hospital in California, but they had trouble at first explaining her symptoms to the doctors because they're Hmong, a historically persecuted ethnic group with roots in Asia, but because of everything they've been through, they have a very understandable stubborn streak. The Hmong also have a very distinct language, culture, set of beliefs, which often run polar opposite to traditional American values, so that already presents a problem. But the parents of this child, although they deeply loved her and cared about her, to put it mildly, they had trouble understanding what her doctors were asking of them. And even when they did understand the instructions, they often disagreed with what was being asked of them, which went on to frustrate the doctors, which upset the parents, which made the doctors more and more concerned about the welfare of this child, which just went on to make the parents more secretive because they didn't trust the doctors. But then someone at the hospital called social services, which traumatized the parents. This whole situation was like an ethical ping pong match in which there were no heroes, no villains. Just a group of people from very different worlds, all trying to look out for this child's welfare, but clashing every step of the way. This book will have you in an argument with yourself the whole time you read it, because you'll learn a history of the Hmong people and get mad at the doctors preemptively for not trying to understand them better. But then you'll meet these doctors and get to know them. You'll see how hard they were trying to help this little girl. So then you'll get mad at the parents for not complying with her med schedule. But then you'll find out that this little girl was having bad reactions to the meds. And so you'll see why the parents weren't giving them to her. And then you'll be mad at the doctors all over again for not trusting her parents. They're her parents, after all. We should trust their judgment. You will not know how to feel at any point during this book. But to me, that was the whole point. So many situations when you're an adult don't have a good guy and a bad guy, just a bunch of people trying to do their best and still failing. I learned so much by reading this book, and through the frustration of how unwinnable of a situation this was, bloomed empathy for everyone involved. This is the kind of book that chisels critical thinking skills deep into your brain. It's the kind of book that forces you to see things from different people's perspectives, to try to understand people who couldn't be more different from you. So basically, I think this is the kind of book that not only makes you a better reader, it makes you a better person. Now, the past few books that I've discussed have all been phenomenal. So you may be asking yourself, what book could she have possibly read that could top any of those? And you might be surprised to hear that the way this next book, my top read of the year, came out of nowhere and absolutely clotheslined me, forced me to put it in the top spot. My top nonfiction book of 2025 was Boomtown, the fantastical saga of Oklahoma City. Its chaotic founding, its apocalyptic weather, its purloined basketball team, and the dream of becoming a world-class metropolis by Sam Anderson. The hard-to-describe theme of this year is strong with this one, but essentially this book aims to paint a portrait of a city deep within flyover country. And he comes at it from several angles. At the heart of everything, though, is the story of their deceptively acquired NBA team, the Oklahoma Thunder, the dynamics of the star players and the manager. But then he also goes back in time to tell the story of how the city came to be, which reads like something out of a Western novel. But then he also weaves in bigger stories from the city's history, like the massive tornadoes that have ripped through it at different points because of where it's situated in America, but then also the bombing that took place there in the mid-90s. He discusses how the city was planned, all these grand aspirations for it that never really came to pass. But then he also randomly includes the lead singer of the Flaming Lips, who is just chaos on legs. It sounds nuts, and it is, but it is also so good. The way he bounces from one topic to another keeps things interesting, but somehow he also prevents that from becoming confusing. You can follow along just fine. And I promise you, even if 0 of the topics I just described sound appealing to you, you could still enjoy this book. You don't need to be a storm chaser, a basketball fan, a Flaming Lips aficionado, or even an American to find this interesting. It is just that good. This book had absolutely no business being this good. I put it on my 25 nonfiction books to read in 2025 list because I thought it would be entertaining. But as I picked it up and kept reading, I couldn't believe what he was achieving, or to be more honest about it, what he was getting away with. He's witty, so the book is fun, but most importantly, he's completely in earnest. You can feel how much he loves this city, and it comes through in this authentic tribute to a city that most people don't spend a lot of time romanticizing. Speaking of romance, though, the novelist Kevin Ansbro once said, "A book should grab you by the lapels and kiss you into tomorrow." And that is exactly how this book made me feel. It wooed me, I fell in love, and now we're going to live happily ever after. So those were my top nonfiction reads of 2025. It was an extraordinarily strong list this year, and I definitely credit part of that to the care with which I put together that 25 nonfiction books to read in 2025 list. I think I've gotten a lot better at picking out which books to prioritize. So I hope that means I have an even better nonfiction reading year in 2026 ahead, because I just got done assembling my list for 2026. I made a whole video about it, which I'll link for you below and up in the cards in case you missed it. Let me know what your top nonfiction reads of the year were, and let me know what you thought of the books on my list. Have you read them? Do you have your own thoughts on them? Do you want to read them after you've heard me hyping them up? We can chat about any or all of that down in the comment section below. All of the books I did speak about today are listed and linked for you in the description box below. And there's also a link in the description box to the playlist that houses all of my favorite nonfiction books of previous years from all of the years that I've had my BookTube channel. So feel free to check that out if you like the types of books I read and you're looking for even more nonfiction recommendations. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.